The following program deals with a controversial subject. The theories expressed are not the only possible interpretation. Viewers are invited to make a judgment based on all available information.
This is your captain speaking. We are beginning our descent into madness.
Open your mind.
And we are off to another edition of West of the Rockies. I'm Frank. Thank you guys for sticking around. I know it's late for some of you, but man, do we have a really, really interesting show lined up for everyone tonight. I want to thank in advance everybody in the chat room. Thank you for logging in and joining us in this conversation. Shout out to everybody listening to us through iHeart. And, of course, if you're listening to us through iTunes, on the podcast, hello to you. And, get ready because this one's going to be a good one. Genevieve, how you doing over there?
I'm doing all right.
You're doing good?
Looking forward to all of this.
Yeah, this is going to be a really, really interesting show. I'm really excited. So I'm going to let you, we're not going to waste too much time here. I'm going to let you do the introduction for tonight's guest, and then we're going to get him on the line. So, Genevieve, take it away.
A quick little summary. So we're going to be interviewing Tony Ortega, who was born in 1963 and raised in Los Angeles, right here in California. He's a journalist and a blogger, best known for his daily blog about the Church of Scientology called The Underground Bunker. He has a BA and MA in English, receiving his first job as a freelancer at the Phoenix New Times in 1995, which also happens to be when he started writing about Scientology. He has continued to write about Scientology ever since. Currently, he's the executive editor of The Lip TV. Just about a month ago, in May 2015, Ortega released a book about Paulette Cooper, a Scientology critic, and the conflict that Paulette had with the organization, and it's called The Unbreakable Miss Lovely, and as far as I know, he's actually touring the book right now and promoting it. So we're obviously extremely grateful for Tony taking the time out right now and being here with us. So please welcome Tony Ortega.
Tony, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, sounds great.
Tony, thank you so much for joining us. And I was reading as well that you're from Orange County. I actually grew up in Buena Park, so it's kind of fun to get to talk to somebody from my neck of the woods. How you doing tonight?
Well, I actually am from the garden spot of Southern California, Compton.
Oh, really?
And I was in Orange County for my high school years, but I actually grew up in Compton and Bellflower and Downey and then ended up in Anaheim.
Nice.
All over the place in Southern California.
No, I was going to say that you are definitely, I imagine you don't have too many friends in the Church of Scientology. However, you have done a great service bringing a lot of these issues with the church to light. Let's start a little basic here, because there might be people that perhaps, they haven't seen that famous documentary that's out, Going Clear, or read some of the stuff that you have written. Why don't you tell people what is the Church of Scientology? How would you define it?
Sure. And I do have friends in the Church of Scientology, Frank.
Okay.
Don't make assumptions.
I have people I talk to who have left the Church of Scientology. I have people I talk to who have not left the Church of Scientology. And they're daily readers of my website. But,
oh, really?
the officials of the church don't like the website, and part of that is that Scientology is a very secretive organization. It was something started by a man named L. Ron Hubbard back in the 50s, and Hubbard's idea was that each of us is this eternal, immortal being called a Satan, and we've lived countless times before, but over that time we've become kind of blind to our true natures because we have something called the reactive mind, which holds us back. And only through Scientology counseling can you remove that reactive mind and begin to see your true nature, your true potentials, and that you can become this superhuman being that is impervious to disease, has a higher IQ, has total recall, and ultimately can affect matter with the mind. It's the universe itself was created by Satans who were bored, and we're all playing in this game that they created. So Hubbard's idea was that each of us could become these super powerful beings if we just followed his coursework. And over the years, he added layers and layers and layers onto those courses until today there's just many, many, many steps you're supposed to go through, and they cost more and more money. So to get to the end of that process, which is called the Bridge to Total Freedom, we estimate it's anywhere from between $500,000 to $2 million for a person to go through all that. And yet, in the 60 years that the Church of Scientology has been in existence, they can't show one single person who can demonstrate any of those abilities. But they're still convincing people that if they go through these steps, that they'll ultimately get there. So that's a basic sense of what the Church of Scientology is about, that you're trying to recover your essential immortal nature by taking their courses, which get more and more expensive.
Wow. And when did you become aware of the Church of Scientology?
Well, I'm from L.A., like we talked about earlier, and so when you grow up there, and also I was the kind of kid that I devoured the L.A. Times every day, even as a small child. And so I think you're just always aware of Scientology. That's one of the headquarters. And I can remember when L. Ron Hubbard died in 1986, reading stories about that. And then in 1990, the L.A. Times had their amazing series by Joel Sapel and Bob Welkos. They had spent 5 years on it, and it was like a 5-day thing at the L.A. Times. And I was mesmerized by those stories. And I don't know if you're old enough to remember, but after that, the Church of Scientology actually put up billboards around town, taking quotes out of the series, out of context, to kind of poke fun at the LA Times. That was a big deal. It goes back, like I said, in 1990. So all these things I was kind of aware of. I was a college English instructor. I became a reporter in 1995. And one of the first stories I just fell into was about a man named Rick Ross, who had been sued, and the Church of Scientology had played a role in that lawsuit. And it was actually a fascinating, larger story about what Rick did for a living, how the Church of Scientology didn't like what he did for a living. And it was my first cover story. It was in November 1995, so I'm coming up on 20 years that I started writing about Scientology. And when you work for that kind of a magazine-style outlet, one story kind of leads to another. You build up sources. I did another story about Scientology in Phoenix. Then I moved back to L.A., and, of course, that's one of the world headquarters, so I did some of my favorite stories of all times there at that point in the late 90s, early 2000s. So it just kind of built on itself. And then when I got to the Village Voice in 2007, the next year is when Scientology really exploded as a news story because of Tom Cruise and some anonymous movement. And so I started doing more again, and to the point where in 2011, there was so much going on that I started writing about it every day.
Wow.
And although I left The Voice in 2012 to write this book about Paulette, I've maintained that daily news coverage at my own website, TonyOrtega.org. And there's just so much going on with Scientology around the country and around the world. I can barely keep up with it, even though I write about it every day.
Could I just ask one more brief background question for those listening?
Sure.
Could you briefly explain what the SeaOrg is and how they operate?
Oh, sure. So L. Ron Hubbard wrote Dianetics in 1950, which kind of got this movement going, and then he started over again in 52 with something called Scientology, and he started building various foundations around the country, places where people could go to get this counseling that he was selling. But almost from the very beginning, the government was not happy with his health claims, and they took that more seriously back then than they do now. And so he had to leave the United States in 1959. He went to England and really succeeded there. Fantastic success in England in the early 60s. But then the British government started to come down on, some of the things that they were claiming and the way people were complaining. And so by that point, Hubbard wanted to go somewhere where they couldn't touch him. And so he literally took Scientology to the sea in 1967.
Wow.
And ran Scientology from a ship from 1967 to 1975. And he had a little group of 3 ships. They were in the Mediterranean at first, then they were in the Atlantic. Ultimately, they were in the Caribbean. And he had, 300 or so young crew with him, really fanatical believers that lived in these very primitive conditions on these ships. and helped him run Scientology, and he referred to them as his sea organization, which makes sense because they were at sea. And they formed the most dedicated crew that worked with him. In 1975, he was sick of running Scientology at sea, decided to come back to land to the United States, and they literally invaded this little town called Clearwater, Florida. I was actually there earlier today. And they surreptitiously took it over. They called themselves United Churches of Florida and bought the Fort Harrison Hotel, which is this real gym in the middle of downtown, and started taking over other buildings before the mayor even realized what was going on. And so to this day, that's where they're headquartered. And even though they're now back on land, they still call that inner organization that runs everything the Sea Organization or the SeaOrg.
Okay.
And so there are three kinds of Scientologists. There are the people that don't work for the organization at all. They're just the parishioners. They're called publics.
Okay.
These are people that are Scientologists. They pay for courses. They pay huge amounts of money. They put in donations, but they're not working for the church. Then you have people that are staff. These are people who work at your local church, or they call it an org, and they sign 2.5 or 5 year contracts, but they make almost no money, and their hours are long. But typically, they'll have a second job outside of Scientology so they can at least survive. And then the third sector is the SeaOrg. These are the people that are the most dedicated. They sign a contract for 1 billion years.
Wow.
And they work for pennies an hour. They're often housed in birthing. They do all kinds of different things for the church, but a lot of it involves manual labor. They're separated from their families for years at a time. These are really dedicated folks. And some of the most interesting stories have come from people that leave the SeaOrg and come out and tell us about it.
I was going to ask, because obviously they're pretty well rooted here in LA, and from what you tell me, Florida, it's another big place. And I mean, it makes sense, right? I mean, they're both kind of like these, celebrity little towns. You always see famous people in these places, and they appeal to a lot of actors and whatnot. What other places, not just in the U.S. but around the world, where is Scientology big?
There's not much in the rest of the world. He really targeted the United Kingdom and Australia and South Africa, English-speaking places at first. And there was a pretty sizable presence in Australia, definitely in England. But they've both really dwindled. And see, those countries take a census and ask people their religious affiliation, unlike the United States. And so we know, for example, there are only 2,000 Scientologists in England.
Oh, wow.
And there are only the same number, there are only 2,000 Scientologists in all of Australia. And they claim hundreds and hundreds of thousands, so it's not true. Alex Gibney's film, Going Clear, debuted in Sydney a couple of weeks ago at this giant theater with 2,300 people. So more Australians were present for the premiere of Going Clear than there are Scientologists in the entire country. Wow. That's how small it is around the world. The only two places in the world where you might actually run into a Scientologist on the street are Los Angeles and Clearwater, Florida. Wow. There just are very few in the rest of the world. And don't buy into their myth that they appeal to all these actors. They've got a few. They attracted Tom Cruise, John Travolta, and Kirstie Alley back in the 70s or 80s. But the younger stars that they've got, people like Bonnie Ribisi, Elizabeth Moss, Erica Christensen, Beck, they were all born into it. They didn't join. And they were brought up in Scientology. So they've got some young stars that grew up in it. They've got a few older folks that joined when it was had less of a stigma. But you don't see them attracting new people. I mean, the word is out. And Scientology, I think, is a little sick of Hollywood. I'm sorry, Hollywood's a little sick of Scientology's influence, and I think you're seeing kind of a backlash against it now.
What is the stance of the Church of Scientology on medicine, specifically psychiatry? I know over the years I've heard a lot of like Tom Cruise speaking out against it and all that. What's the issue there with Scientology and psychiatry?
When L. Ron Hubbard's story was that before he published Dianetics in 1950. In 47 or 48, so he claims that he took these ideas of his and this material and this theory for how to heal the mind to the American Psychiatric Association and the American Medical Association and said, here, I have discovered how to heal the human mind. And, of course, they looked at it and realized it was pure quackery. As Larry Wright said in the film, I thought it was perfect. He said they looked at it and it looked like psychological folklore. You know, there was nothing scientific about it, and they weren't interested. And that just enraged him. And so ever since, he made psychiatry the ultimate evil that Scientology opposes, to the point where in his lectures he would talk about how the evil psychs, as he calls them, are responsible for everything bad in the universe, going back millions of years. Now, you know, my textbooks tell me that psychiatry is only about 100 years old, right? But according to L. Ron Hubbard, the evil psychs have been ruining everything for all living beings for millions and billions of years.
That's impressive.
It's their devil, it's their Satan. And so they don't care if you break your leg, a psychologist goes to the hospital. If you're given medicine for it, they're going to take it. But what they really don't want to have anything to do is psychiatric care or psychiatric medicine. That's the difference. I know some people kind of, you know, they get confused with Christian Science. Those people don't even want to take aspirin, right? But
right.
You know, Scientologists will go to a doctor for physical ailment, but they are encouraged as much as possible to handle any of their problems with Scientology methods. So we do hear about people who get cancer, for example, that decide to try to handle it with Scientology methods, even though that's not a psychiatric ailment. And, you know, you see a lot of online GoFundMes for these older Scientologists that are battling these diseases that they didn't handle by just going to a doctor. So there are some Scientologists who stay away from all medicines, but I think the official line of the church is just stay away from psychiatry and psychiatric medicines.
Oh, wow.
At this point, I'd like to ask, and I'm sure it's been bugging a lot of people, kind of a loaded question. Isn't it strange and almost ironic that they promote a type of counseling, what they call auditing, even though they hate the idea of psychotherapy so much? Which, you know, to a lot of people, this auditing looks exactly like a type of psychotherapy.
Well, Genevieve, you hit it exactly. I mean, from the very beginning. I mean, this is why, you know, why was Hubbard so popular in 1950? And I think it's that in 1950, people were curious about things like psychoanalysis, but it was expensive. It had an odd sort of European gloss to it. Americans maybe weren't ready to take it on. And so along comes this guy that says, you know, you don't need to go to a psychiatrist. You don't need to pay all this money. Buy my book, and you and another person can sit down and do this counseling yourself. I mean, that was one of the appeals of Dianetics, was that it took no training. That, you know, if you just followed his instructions and one person was the auditor and the other person was the subject, they call it pre-clear, the auditor just listens. And you know, you would sit down with another person and talk about the traumas in your life. Well, you know what? Of course you're going to feel better.
Yeah.
You know, if you've got somebody who's going to patiently listen to you while you talk about the bad things that happened in your childhood and other things in your life, of course you're going to feel better. And as you point out, there's not much difference between that and psychoanalysis. And I remember hearing people call it a poor man's version of psychoanalysis, right? It was very cheap at first. So, yeah, and these people would feel better. And then the trick was they ascribed that to Hubbard and believed that Hubbard had made some breakthrough scientific discovery. And he really hadn't. He had just taken some basic psychological effects and put it together with these theories of his, and it just got more and more outlandish. But people became, and I've talked to a lot of Scientologists who just that act of sitting down with somebody who patiently listens to them is so revelatory that they spent the next 20 years chasing that feeling.
Oh, wow.
And it's never as strong as when they first started. And they find themselves 20 years later with this this machine called an EMeter trying to drive away unseen alien entities attached to them. And he was like, how did we get from just a nice listener listening to my problems to this craziness? And that's I think a lot of times Scientologists come out, and it's actually hard for them to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
How did I get to that point? And they're a little embarrassed. It can take a Scientologist years to decompress from that experience, and many people never go public. For every person that tells me their story and I put it on my website, there's many other people I talk to that are just not ready to go public, and they are mystified that something so simple took them into something so sort of sinister.
No, I imagine.
While I'm asking questions, veering off that specific topic a tiny bit, it's pretty much explicitly stated that, the practices and the beliefs of Scientology in general are founded on fiction. And I get very confused about whether the followers and the believers do actually believe it's fictional, or whether, despite the fact that they are told it's fiction, even by the creator himself, they still believe it's true. I get very, very confused about that.
Well, I don't know where you come up with that idea of fiction, because they're not told that at all.
Okay.
And if you look at the first book, what's the title of the first book? It's Dianetics, the Modern Science of Mental Health.
Okay.
And Hubbard always sold this as an exact science. He claimed that he had discovered the true nature of the human mind for the first time, and that his methods were scientific. Later, he started calling it a church, mostly for tax reasons. And long-time Scientologists will tell you, I was in it for the science. I believed that we had discovered how the mind really works, the true nature of human beings, and I believed in these counseling sessions that I was actually remembering what happened to me 10 million years ago on another planet, that these were real memories. The EMeter confirmed it. They believe that this is a science they're engaged in. There's no belief. I've had Scientologists tell me that one of the reasons that it appeals to them is they're never asked to believe anything.
Mm-hmm.
They're never. You're being asked to tell us what you remember from your life. I think this is part of why it appeals to celebrities as well, is that, in other organizations, if you go to a Christian church, a mosque, or a synagogue, what do? You go to a building with a group of other people, and you hear stories about things that happened to other people 2,000 years ago, right? And you're asked to accept some miracles and supernatural things as, the secret to the universe and whatever. And that's fine. You decide that you want to be part of this group. You accept these things that are probably impossible, but they're part of your faith. Scientology is not like that at all. In Scientology, you go down to the building, it's you and one other person, the auditor. And the auditor asks you about you.
Yeah. What
do you remember from your childhood? What do you remember from a previous life? What do you remember from 10 million years ago? It's always you. And so my personal theory is that that's what appeals to some of these celebrities is, this is an organization completely dedicated to them. It's really unusual in OT3 that they're told about this Xenu story, because that's the first time in all of their experience that Hubbard is telling them a story that they need to accept as the truth. Up until then, it's all been them talking about themselves. And so I think it appeals to people who like this idea that we may live in a mundane world and we may have a mundane self, this flesh body we walk around in, and we have limitations in our intellect, but that there's inside of us, there's this incredible, narrative of the universe that we're part of. That appeals to some people. I don't buy it. I like I don't have a problem with the fact that, I'm a human being on a planet and my life's only going to last 70 years and, I'm not going to be able to do everything I want to do. It's okay. I appreciate life the way it is. But some people really like to believe that they're part of some grand narrative of the universe, and of course they're these magical superhuman beings that are just people can't see. And Scientology tells you that, yeah, that's the case, and we're going to discover that by going through your own memories. Well, you can see why it's a powerful idea for some people who want to believe that about themselves, and also they offer certainty. That with this machine, we're going to tell you exactly what you were doing 10 million years ago on a Tuesday at 10 in the morning. I mean, to a scientific person, that's ludicrous. Yeah. But to people in Scientology, they're very susceptible to that idea that Hubbard and his machine can take you back billions of years and tell you exactly what you were doing in exactly what place.
Okay, just very briefly, and if I could just rephrase the question, what do Scientologists do when they find out about certain, revelations about how Scientology was founded, i.e. that
Xenu?
The fact is, common knowledge that things are kind of made up along the way.
You're asking me what happens when
Scientology gets told that it's not real.
Right.
So
I know what you mean. So there's all this information about Hubbard and what a liar he was. And
exactly. And
he nothing he said about himself was true, and that he was a con man and he got arrested for things. And Scientologists aren't told those things. But what do they do when they're confronted with this information that Hubbard was actually making stuff up about himself? He was a bigamist. He abandoned his children for the most part. He was a terrible father. That this stuff that he made about Dianetics and Scientology has no scientific validity to it. How does Scientologists handle that information is what you're asking me, right?
Yeah.
This is one of the things that's fascinating about Scientology is it's very much a control, a system of information control. It's a snitching culture. It's a interrogation culture. When you become involved in Scientology, you have to go through these things called security checks or sec checks. They're interrogations. And there are no secrets in Scientology. You have to tell them everything about your life if you want to remain in the church as a member of good standing. You have to tell them all about your sex life, all the details, all the people you've ever slept with. And they're writing this all down, okay? And it costs you money. So, and they're taught to snitch on each other. So if somebody's watching Going Clear, if a Scientologist dares to watch that movie and somebody else in their family finds out about it, they'll turn them in.
Oh, wow.
And then that person will then have to go through an interrogation that can last weeks. I talked to a woman recently who went through one of those interrogations because one of her friends turned her in because she admitted that she'd watched Leah Remini on Dancing with the Stars. She was put through an interrogation that lasted 3 weeks long and cost her $4,500.
Wow.
So knowing all that can happen, Scientologists are very, very good at ignoring anything negative about the church because they know if they actually hear anything negative and somebody knows it, it's going to cost them thousands of dollars.
Right. I saw a question here in the chat in regards to the EMeter. So I wanted to ask you, we were talking about auditing a few minutes ago, and you mentioned the EMeter. Can you tell me a little bit what happens during an auditing session, how this EMeter, what's its role during the session?
Right. An EMeter is a very crude device, but is incredibly powerful in Scientology. It's 1/4 of what a polygraph would be, a lie detector. A lie detector, a polygraph, measures your pulse, your breathing, your blood pressure, and your skin galvanism. The EMeter only does that last part. It measures an electric current going through your skin. And if it was a scientific device, they would attach a couple of patches to your chest and measure the electricity going through you. Instead, they have you hold on to the sensors, which introduces the variability of grip, the sweat in your skin, the salt content of your sweat. There are various things. Electrical engineers have taken this machine apart and explained how it can be manipulated by a number of different ways. It's useless as a tool of measuring anything because of those variables that are introduced. But Scientologists are trained to believe that this device is basically able to tell when you're lying. It's measuring. They believe it's measuring the mass of your thoughts. Of course, thoughts have no mass, but Scientologists believe this. All that matters is that Scientologists believe that they cannot hold back a negative thought about Scientology or any other secret without the machine knowing it. And so because of that, it becomes an incredibly powerful interrogation tool because they believe they can't hold back secrets. And so you're using it in auditing so that the auditor watches the needle and you'll see the needle move and they'll say, "What were you thinking about then?" And you'll say something about, the color yellow. Well, what was the association of yellow in your life? And so they use it as a tool to kind of help you with that psychoanalysis and speaking. and it's just random. But it's more nefarious use is in those interrogation sessions, because they're used to get people to just talk about all their secrets. And so Scientologists just completely crumble and talk about everything in their lives, which is all written down and then used against them if they leave. So it's just a really insidious device than the way that they're using it.
I wanted to kind of take the conversation in a bit of a morbid direction, if you will. The death of Lisa McPherson a few years ago, or some time ago. I was too young to remember it. It's funny, when I went back to YouTube and found some of those clips from, some of the TV shows that covered it, getting the information in my head a bit, I was pretty shocked. What do you know about the Lisa McPherson case? Can you tell us a little bit about that, and if you've discovered it?
We're coming up on the 20th anniversary of her death. She died in December 1995. It was a long time ago. But the reason why it's significant is that the way she died is really directly tied to Scientology's ideas about how to handle mental health. She was attractive young woman from the Dallas area. She'd been in the Dallas Scientology org, and then eventually moved out to Clearwater. And she was struggling to go clear. That's the first major intermediate step along the way to becoming, this experienced Scientologist. And she was really struggling to get there. We have found out later that David Miscavige, the leader of Scientology, was personally involved in her case and probably should have seen the warning signs that she was mentally unstable. But she finally went clear, and then sometime later she was involved in a small automobile accident in Clearwater, just a fender bender. But a paramedic was called, and they arrived, and they checked on her, and she seemed to be okay. And so then they were somewhere else, and they turned around, and she had gotten completely naked in the middle of the street. And so they took her to a local hospital to have a psychiatric examination. And Scientologists arrived and said, let her go, because, of course, that's the worst thing would be any kind of psychiatry. And these doctors were saying, look, she really needs some help, And but they wouldn't. They said, no, we're going to take her. We're going to take care of her. They took her to the Fort Harrison Hotel, which is that real gem in the middle of town I mentioned. That's like their mecca, their most holy spiritual place on earth. Right. And 17 days later, she was dead. Wow. She was kept in a room, and they ran this thing called the introspection rundown on her. The introspection rundown was L. Ron Hubbard's idea for how to handle people who have had a psychotic break. He came up with it, I want to say in 1971. I might be wrong about that. But while they were on the ship, they were still at sea at that point. They had a man in the crew who had really gone kind of nuts, and Hubbard locked him up in a room and just didn't let him see anybody else. No sense, just total sensory deprivation. The guy seemed to get a little better, and then Hubbard said, "Oh, okay, I have discovered the way to handle people who've had a psychotic break." He called it the introspection rundown. And so that's what they did with this woman. They put her in a room. They wouldn't let her talk to anybody. They would just bring her in food. The people who brought her things were instructed, don't talk to her, to ignore her. And she was raving. I mean, she was raving in that room. And she stopped eating and drinking. And 17 days later, died of dehydration. She was just extremely dehydrated. Oh, wow. And so it was, I don't think they murdered her. I think it was just, it was neglect. They were following these insanely stupid rules that L. Ron Hubbard had written, and they couldn't veer from them because they didn't know another way. And so she died, and it took another year before the public actually heard anything about it. The police were investigating it, and they asked for some help, and they weren't. Somebody I know named Jeff Jacobson actually noticed that the police were asking for help, realized that the address was the Fort Harrison Hotel, fed it to a reporter, and then it exploded in the news story in 96 and 97. So the state of Florida actually criminally charged the Church of Scientology. Wow. And then the family of Lisa McPherson sued the Church of Scientology. So through the late 90s, this was the biggest thing facing the Church of Scientology. They got a ton of bad press over it. And in 2000, the medical examiner was convinced to change the method of death. and Scientology got out of the criminal charge.
Oh, wow.
And years later now, one of the former executives has come forward and said, yeah, we just threw everything we could at her and made her cave. So
Wow.
Scientology spent something like $30 million working that case, trying to influence judges, and got themselves out of the criminal case, and then the civil case was settled in 2004. And there's still repercussions from that today. But Janet Reitman, in her book, Inside Scientology, really did a great job writing about the Lisa McPherson case. She's got 4 chapters that are just amazing. And I guess the legacy is the introspection rundown still exists. I mean, I've written about a couple of women in recent years that have been put through it.
Wow.
There could be another tragedy, you know. Yeah. And again, ultimately what it is these people, the Church of Scientology claims to be doing better work than psychiatry, but the truth is they're amateurs, and they shouldn't be going near people with actual mental problems. This is something that it would be, you wonder why the government doesn't look into it.
Right.
And in this particular case, it was just a real tragedy.
Yeah, no, I was going to say it doesn't speak very highly of our judicial system, but, I mean, it does seem like if you have the money for a good attorney and a good defense, you can pretty much, get away with anything. There was another incident that I remember, and I went back to kind of refresh my memory a bit. This one involved the Travoltas and their young son, Jet, who died under, I guess, questionable, mysterious circumstances. A lot of people felt that it was due to his belief in Scientology that his son died because he didn't get the care that he needed. Can you tell us a little bit about that case, if you can?
Yeah, I mean, Jet had seizures, and he was clearly autistic. And the Travoltas, for whatever reason, took him off of his seizure medicine. I think I want to be careful on that one because, I think it's too easy to draw conclusions in that case. And I don't know how much the Scientology was influenced them. I don't know Jet's particular situation. Travolta did tell the Bahamian police that his son was autistic, so I think it's a myth to think that he didn't believe it or didn't know it. I think it's just a real tragic thing, and I feel bad for the Travoltas that they went through that. And did they not have him on seizure medication because of Scientology? I think it could have been a combination of factors, and I think they really did love their child, and they didn't want this to happen. Right. And so it's one of those cases that I know journalists want to make it black and white and blame Scientology, but I think there could have been a number of different factors, and so I tend not to write about that one too much.
I see. Another topic that comes up when you talk about Scientology and some of those celebrities, particularly in the case of Tom Cruise, and I know, again, John Travolta comes up in this, and it kind of goes with the Supreme Court ruling this week making gay marriage legal. It's homosexuality within the Church of Scientology. First, can you tell me what is the Church's stance on homosexuality?
Yeah, it's a very homophobic organization, and it goes back to Hubbard. I mean, in Dianetic, he called it a perversion, and he came up with this thing he called the tone scale, where he put human emotions on a scale, and it's an odd scale because, for example, love is not on that scale.
Oh, wow!
But one of the things that he, the higher you go on the scale, the better your state. And one of the lowest ones is 1.1, which he called covert hostility. Someone who is 1-1 is someone who might be smiling at you while they're planning to stab you in the back.
Oh, wow.
And he then said that homosexuals are 1-1. And so very clearly, homosexuals are not to be trusted, and they mean harm. And so in Scientology, you do auditing to raise your tone level on the tone scale. And so from the beginning, the idea was gay people are 1-1, covert hostility, but if they do auditing, they'll be raised to 2, 3, 4, and they'll be in better shape. But so it's a gay cure. You see?
Mm-hmm. Wow.
And I've talked to former top officials and said, absolutely, this is the thinking inside, is that, yes, you can join Scientology if you're homosexual, but you need to get auditing so that you're no longer homosexual.
Wow.
And there are places in the United States where there are Scientologists who are more tolerant, of course, individually. But the church's official line is that, homosexuality is a perversion and that homosexuals are 1-1. And that's still the truth today. So, and I've read the papers, for example, of a man that was a homosexual who was in the church and really wanted to change things.
Mm-hmm.
It was very clear from his work that he was told, yes, you can be part of the church, but you just can't engage in any kind of homosexual activity. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a really screwed up organization, and it would take a lot to change it, because I think David Miscavige in particular is very homophobic.
Mm.
But what do these stars do? What do these actors do when they get in? Because clearly John Travolta's got some issues.
Mm-hmm.
This is why Travolta can't be honest with himself or with the public.
Right.
Because, if he came out as a homosexual or bisexual, that would, put him in jeopardy with the church. Now, with Tom Cruise,
Mm-hmm.
I think those rumors are completely garbage. I think any reporter who covers Cruise honestly
Mm-hmm.
and with good sourcing will tell you that there's nothing to the gay rumors. But with Travolta, and there's also this notion, even Alex Gibney said this in the film, that, they have all these secrets that they've written down,
Mm-hmm.
and that makes it tough for John Travolta to believe. And I think there's definitely something to that for a lot of people. But with Travolta, what more could they tell us that we don't already know?
Right.
If he came out tomorrow and said, yeah, I'm attracted to men, he'd be a hero. People would love him. I bet he'd get even better movie roles,
Yeah, very true.
But for some reason, he stays in that closet,
Mm-hmm.
and I think Scientology has a lot to do with it, because Scientology has taught him that homosexuality is 1-1. It's covert hostility.
And you talk to a lot of Scientology members, both old and new. What is the consensus of David Miscavige's leadership? I know that actually he himself said that he was going to, usher in the new age of tech. So I think that was the phrase that he used. And it seems like the Church of Scientology became a little bit more strict in a lot of ways, or is that just the impression that maybe I'm getting because I haven't covered this for years? But what have you heard about David Miscavige's leadership and how it compares to when L. Ron Hubbard was still around to run things?
Yeah, well, you got to give the guy some credit. Most organizations like this have a hard time surviving when their founder dies, and
Mm-hmm.
that's 29 years now since Hubbard died.
True.
And 29 years. So L. Ron Hubbard ran Scientology for 36 years. David Miscavige is up to 29 years. He's done kind of an amazing job getting Scientology through some big crises. He got the tax-exempt status, that kind of thing. But he's got a problem, and that is that Scientology cannot evolve.
Mm-hmm.
They have to rely on everything. He's not allowed to write his own policies. He has to just enforce what Hubbard wrote.
Oh.
Hubbard left behind an insane number of policies that governs everything from how to run a church to how to wash windows correctly. This guy was obsessed with telling people how to live. And Miscavige cannot overtly change any of that. Now, he's been subtly changing things in significant ways that are driving away a lot of Scientologists because they don't want him to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And he's doing it in a way that really puts the emphasis on fundraising, and he's enforcing things in a way that rips apart families.
Mm-hmm.
So there's been a large exodus of longtime loyal members who are not leaving because they've lost faith in Hubbard or Scientology. They just can't take Miscavige anymore. So Scientology is in big trouble right now. There's a lot of really good people leaving Scientology today, and he's such a martinet. He's such a stickler for rules. And I think, the thing about Hubbard was he came up with all these things like ethics and disconnection and fair gaming people, retaliating against people. He came up with all that. But I've talked to numerous people that worked closely with him saying that he knew when to back off. When somebody was, it had been in the SeaOrg and they're working day and night and they're about to break,
Mm-hmm.
Hubbard would see that and try to make things a little bit better for them. Well, they say Miscavige is incapable of that. He just keeps pushing and pushing and pushing, and he pushes people away. I think it's, some of the people come out and they say, oh, things were great under Hubbard and Miscavige is messing it up. I think that's an exaggeration. I mean, Hubbard put all these policies into place.
Mm-hmm.
But I do, I think there's no question that Miscavige is driving away a lot of people that Scientology could really use,
Mm-hmm. Tony, we're going to take a quick top of the hour break here. We're going to play a quick song, and then we're going to come back because we still want to talk to you about your book, The Unbreakable, Miss Lovely, How the Church of Scientology Tried to Destroy Paulette Cooper, which is, it sounds like a fascinating story. And I know you've been promoting the book here in LA. Unfortunately, we missed it, but we heard
Florida
about
today.
Yeah. And yeah, you're just flying back from Florida as well. And we also want to talk about what happens when people leave the church and what happens to people who are critical of the church and things of that nature. So if you'd be so kind, Tony, just to hang on the line for a few minutes.
Bet.
Awesome.
I'll
All right.
run down and get my laundry.
Cool. Sounds good. And we'll be right back in just a few minutes. We're gonna play a little bit of Oasis because I like this song and haven't heard it in a while.
Here we go.
Don't go away. West of the Rockies is coming right back. Our guest tonight, Tony Ortega. Enjoy this one. Here we go.
West of the Rockies with Frank.
What's up, guys? This is Jorge Diaz of Paranormal Activity, The Marked Ones, and you're listening to West of the Rockies with Frank. This portion of the show is sponsored by Haunted Orange County, your premier source for all things haunted in and around OC. From haunted history ghost walks to ghost group hunting expeditions at some of SoCal's most haunted destinations. Make your fall plans early and book an upcoming tour or investigation today. Visit hauntedoc.com.
Open your mind.
And we are back to the second hour of West of the Rockies. I'm Frank. Thank you guys for sticking around. The conversation is just heating up. So far, it's been amazing. As always, I'm Engineer Frank on Twitter, West of the Rockies on Facebook. Don't forget to check out the website at WoTRradio.com. A lot of cool stuff on there, including an interview with a former Scientologist that we did a few weeks ago, Lynn Campbell, who has a hair salon right across the street.
And does lovely haircuts.
And yeah, definitely. She's done my hair a couple of times, and I must say, never been happier.
Yoga lessons. She does everything.
Yeah, no, she's great. She's great. Shout out to Lynn. But yeah, definitely check out the website, WoTRradio.com. A lot of cool stuff on there. As always, I'm joined by Genevieve, who you can find on Twitter. Genevieve.
If you can spell my name, it's Genevieve Uway.
On Twitter, and you can also catch her on this station, Thursday nights, on a music show, taking requests, telling jokes, and all kinds of weird random things.
Silly things.
Yeah.
Anything goes.
Kind of like the Scientology cakes I'm reading about on the chat room.
You're missing out. You're missing out.
I can tell. Shout out to everybody in the chat room and everybody listening to us through iHeartRadio. As I said, this is it's been an amazing show. We're joined tonight by Tony Ortega, journalist, current executive editor at The Lip TV, and he also has a very, very popular blog called The Underground Bunker, which you can find at TonyOrtega.org.
Being updated constantly.
Yeah,
so.
and I mean, if you scroll, it's almost like a little black hole in the internet. You start scrolling and reading, and next thing you know, it's Thursday, and you missed 3 days of work.
Sounds like YouTube.
I know, but we're really excited to have Tony on the show. Tony, can you hear us? Okay.
Yes, I'm here.
Awesome. Now, Tony, I know you just published this book, The Unbreakable, Miss Lovely. How the Church of Scientology Tried to Destroy Paulette Cooper. Can you tell me a little bit about this book and how and why you decided to focus on the story of Paulette?
Yeah, sure. Paulette Cooper was a magazine writer in Manhattan who was one of the first people to really dig into Scientology's secrets. She was not the only one, and there were other people a little before her, but her book, The Scandal of Scientology, came out in 1971. It was the harshest book and so far, and it was a paperback, so it sold well. And Scientology a few years earlier had created its own spy wing. I don't know how many churches have spy wings, but Scientology does to this day.
Wow.
And they directed all of their retaliation efforts against her. They smeared her. They tried to ruin her reputation.
Mm-hmm.
They framed her for a felony. At one point, she was facing 15 years in prison for a crime she had not committed. They encouraged her to commit suicide.
Wow.
They ran multiple operations against her from 1969. They sued her 19 times.
Wow.
All of those lawsuits were wrapped up in 1985, but I actually found evidence that they were still spying on her and keeping tabs on her up until the year 2010.
Oh, wow.
Oh, wow.
So this woman, nobody went through as much retaliation as she did. And the reason I had gotten to know her, and, you know, one of the things, when you write about Scientology, the number one thing people always ask you, well, are you worried about it? You know, are you going to be harassed?
Mm-hmm.
Have you heard about this woman, Paulette Cooper? I mean, you know, she's just sort of this legend. But I got to know her as a person, and I realized that there was a much more interesting, larger story there. And so I proposed that we write a book, and I wrote a book about her with her cooperation. And so that's what I did the last couple of years. The book just came out, and we've been touring on it. And we just had an appearance today in Clearwater, right? Just a block across the street from one of Scientology's facilities. So that was a lot of fun. It was a big crowd, and you know, people. You know, the movie Going Clear has helped a lot. Yeah, I was in that, and it's made people very fascinated about Scientology. And so now I've got this book out. I hope, you know, people read it and see just to what extent Scientology went to back then, because they're still doing things like it today. Yeah. There's a lawsuit going on in Texas involving a couple that was being surveilled and harassed. And in an effort to keep Miscavige out of that case, Scientology stipulated to the evidence that, yes, they still are hiring private investigators and lawyers, and they're following people and harassing people. So, you know, not that much has changed since what Paulette went through in the 70s, but she just got it worse than anyone else. And the reason I decided to do that story was that, you know, Janet Reitman had written a really great book about overall history of Scientology in 2011, and then Lawrence Wright had written the major book about Scientology, focusing on Paul Haggis and L. Ron Hubbard. That came out in 2013. So I wasn't going to try to do the same thing again. I wanted one specific story that was very narrative focused, very cinematic. And so I just thought her story was so dramatic, and I was able to bring in a lot of things that were happening at the time. I also wrote it in a different way. I didn't write it. It's a history, but I wrote it as if it was happening. So it kind of unfolds like a novel, and people are really responding to that and saying that they enjoy the ride. You know what I mean? Yeah, no.
Could I just ask, is it scary deciding to write and, I guess, deciding to publish something about Scientology?
You know, for Paulette, it was a big decision because she settled everything in 1985, and she has spoken out since then, but she's always been kind of careful. Yeah. And so, first of all, it was difficult for her to go back through those days. They're very difficult days for her to talk about. I mean, she was literally on the verge of suicide in the summer of 1973. Oh, my. But also, she doesn't want the harassment to start up again. And so that was not a simple decision for her to make. I, however, was anxious. I thought it was a good story. But then it was an issue getting a publisher. I am published by Silvertail Books in London. Yeah. And my publisher is a man named Humphrey Hunter, and he's decided, even though in England it's even more risky, that he's fascinated by the subject. He published John Sweeney's book that came out a couple of years ago. He republished a book by Russell Miller that's a legend in the field, Barefaced Messiah. And so now my book is his third book on Scientology, and he's in England, where it's, you know, they have less protections than they do here. So Humphrey's just really brave, and I'm glad that he's my publisher. He actually helped me figure out how to tell the story. I'm really indebted to him. And the book looks great. So, I mean, I'm very happy with going with Silvertail Books. And I'm going over there next month. I'm going to be in London. We're putting on an event on August 4th at Conway Hall. And I'll be with John Sweeney and Humphrey Hunter, so that should be fun.
Oh, that sounds like a blast! Yeah,
I know. Frank's getting jealous.
I know. Yeah, I love London and that side of the world. It's great. Now, I was reading, you know, these private investigators and all. If you just do a Google search, you will find very current news on this. Yeah. And I know that you have been a target of theirs. I was reading an article here where a spokesperson for the Church of Scientology called you a quote-unquote parasite who used bigotry and false allegations about the Church of Scientology to create a cottage industry of hate. And it just goes to show how strongly, I guess, to put it mildly, they feel about their critics. I think it happened earlier this week. A story came out about some email hacking that occurred, and your name and your email account popped up in this story. Can you tell me a little bit about what happened there?
Yeah, this was kind of a fascinating story. I had caught this guy a couple of years ago spoofing my email. What that means is he had been sending out emails making it look like I had sent them. Mm-hmm. And he had screwed up, and I was getting receipts on those. And so my webmaster, who knows this stuff really well, just, explained to me what was going on. And I called the guy up, and I said, what are you doing?
Wow.
And he claimed that we were both being victimized by another private investigator, and it was part of some missing persons investigation. Okay. And my webmaster, who is also my attorney, assured me that this guy was lying to me. But we didn't have any other information. I couldn't see that my account had actually been accessed. It wasn't even my private email account anyway. I asked him flat out, are you doing something on the behalf of Church of Scientology? He said, no, I would never work for those guys. And so I just dropped it at that point because I just didn't see anything that I could report to the police or anything like that.
Yeah.
So a couple of years goes by, and all of a sudden I get this notice from the U.S. Attorney's Office here in New York that I have been victimized by this guy. They've arrested him. They've prosecuted him. He's pled guilty to hacking, and I've been invited to submit what's called a victim impact statement that could affect his sentence. And I was really shocked by that. I thought, I still have no evidence that he did anything but that spoofing. I still have no evidence that he accessed any of my data. What would I say in a victim impact statement, And they're not really giving me any more information. This time my attorney called his attorney and said, we want to know one thing. Who was he working for? Was he working for the Church of Scientology? Mm-hmm. And his attorney gave us that same story about the missing person thing, and no, not working for Scientology. So again, I planned to drop it. I just didn't see where I was, really seriously affected. So then last week, literally 2 days before this guy was going to be sentenced, I heard from Mike Rinder, who's the former international spokesman of Scientology.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, listen, I've got a potential story for you. And I said, what is it? He said, this Friday, this private investigator in New York is being sentenced, and I've been asked to submit a victim statement. Apparently he hacked me. And I said, are you talking about Eric Saldar? And he couldn't believe it. We didn't realize that we were both on this list. And so that's when we realized, okay, come on. I mean, who else could he be working for? He targets a journalist who writes about Church of Scientology and the former spokesman of the Church of Scientology, who's, been the subject of so much intense surveillance and harassment. So that's when we decided Thursday that we would both write impact statements to the court. Mm-hmm. And the U.S. attorney then called me and said, do you want to speak in court? And so Friday I actually spoke to the judge.
Wow.
The judge basically said, look, I can't. What I told the judge, first of all, I don't know what this guy did to us. Mm-hmm. Second of all, I want to know who he's working for. And the judge explained he can't really force the defendant to give up information about who he was working for. But he was frustrated as well. He was surprised to hear that we hadn't been told anything about our victimization. Oh, wow. I'm still pretty sure it was just that spoofing attempt. And I don't think this guy ever got access to my data. But we're going to press him now. He was sentenced to prison. He's going to go to prison in a couple of months. But he's only going to be in prison for 90 days, and which is fine. I don't care. I'm not trying to get this guy a bigger sentence.
Right.
I just want to know who paid him.
Right.
And so we're gonna keep pressing him to give up that information because it's just really a strange credulity to believe that anyone other than the Church of Scientology would pay an investigator to investigate Mike Rinder and Tony Ortega. And if we can prove that, I mean, it shows that they're still using illegal techniques 40 years after they were using illegal techniques against Paulette Cooper.
Right.
And, the lesson always is that the Church of Scientology never changes. It's always still doing what it's always done. And it's because they're still following Hubbard's playbook. He's the one that set down these tactics and strategies, in the 60s, and they're still following it.
Speaking of strategies, are the group known as the Squirrel Busters a part of this strategy? And can you tell us a little bit as to what or
Yeah, that
who
was
this
such a
group
bizarre episode. That's actually what convinced me to start writing about Scientology.
Oh, really?
It was April 2011.
Uh-huh.
Marty Raffin had been the number 2 guy in Scientology. He left in 2004. He disappeared. He disappeared so completely. There were rumors online that he had died.
Oh, wow.
But then he resurfaced, and he started a blog in 2009. Was harshly critical of Miscavige and the church.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of former Scientologists rallied to him. I started reading him all the time. It was fascinating material. And Miscavige retaliated with private investigators and attorneys, and he was being followed and surveilled. And then in April 2011, this bizarre goon squad shows up on his porch.
Mm-hmm.
They're all wearing these light blue T-shirts that have images of Marty's head on the bodies of squirrels with the cross out through them. And they're not only holding cameras, they've got GoPro cameras strapped to their foreheads.
Wow.
And they're there to intimidate Marty. And they were, in Scientology, you have to practice Hubbard's techniques in the official church, the approved way, pay lots of money. If you leave the church and continue to practice the auditing and counseling, they call you a squirrel, which is the worst thing you can call a Scientologist. It means that you're squirreling the tech, you're misusing Hubbard's ideas. Mm-hmm. And so that's why they were calling themselves Squirrel Busters, as they consider Marty a squirrel, because he was counseling people outside of the official church. Basically, it was an intimidation squad that was outside of his house and following him around town every day for 5 months.
Wow.
And for the first part of that, I had that story all to myself. I was the only journalist in the country covering it. I was in New York. Eventually, some really good local reporters got onto it and did some excellent research. But it's just such a bizarre episode in the history, of American religion, I guess. It's just, you watch that video, and it's just hard to believe this is how a church defends itself against a former member.
Yeah.
And I think it really backfired on them. I'm not really sure what Miscavige thought he was going to get out of it, but now it's just like the quintessential example of what Scientology does to people who dare criticize it. They send these goons to try to destroy your life.
How, to the best of your knowledge, does the Church of Scientology categorize their enemies, if you will? Because obviously they're fighting a war on many fronts. If it's a former Scientologist or members of the press or family members that demand to see their loved ones that they haven't seen for years. Do you know if they categorize these people?
They have some.
Do they treat? How do they go about it?
Yeah, they have different labels. Mm-hmm. They have different labels for people. In general, we're talking about suppressive persons. Mm-hmm. In Hubbard philosophy, what's holding you back from going up that glorious bridge to superhuman godhood is suppression, and anything that holds you back is suppressive. Mm-hmm. And so people who criticize the Church of Scientology, people who leave and then badmouth it, these are called suppressive persons, and they're called SPs for short. So basically all of the people that get targeted are SPs. In particular, Scientologists who leave and continue to use the Hubbard technology on their own, they're called squirrels. So some SPs are squirrels. Okay. Reporters are called merchants of chaos.
Oh, wow.
So some SPs are merchants of chaos. So they have, some different terms for people. Yeah. But basically the idea is that you're suppressive, you're holding Scientology back. And Hubbard wrote in his policies that Scientology can do anything to you if you're an SP. You can be destroyed. Your life can be completely turned upside down. So they take that seriously. They don't want to just make you go away. They want to ruin your life, destroy your career, make you bankrupt, drive you to suicide. This is what Scientology wants to do to people, and nobody was a better example than Paulette Cooper.
Now, there was a story that came out back in April, and I was quite shocked because I think it was the first time.
A lot.
I was very shocked because I think for the first time it kind of allowed people like myself who are, are not 100% familiar with Scientology to see how far they're willing to go. And this was a report that came out on how David Miscavige was having his own father tailed by private investigators, and the police got involved. I guess they pulled him over or something. And inside the van of this private investigator, they found an arsenal, enough to arm a small army. It's like hundreds of rounds and automatic weapons and rifles and whatnots. What does that tell us about the Church of Scientology?
Well, it's a very significant story. Ron Miscavige Sr., David Miscavige's father, Ron got his whole family into Scientology back in the 70s, or maybe it was late 50s. As David rose up the ranks and become the leader of Scientology, his father, Ron, he's a trumpet player, he's a musician, and so Scientology puts on a lot of events that involve music, and so you would see Ron at these events, and, he's a nice guy, Pennsylvania, and he's always, his son ran the thing. Well, then in 2000, and they were out at the IT base, which is this massive compound near Hemet, California. In 2012, as I said, there's this mass exodus of longtime people that didn't like the way things were going and were leaving. In 2012, Ron Sr. escaped from the base.
Wow.
He escaped from his own son's church.
Wow.
And ran. And has been living in a couple of different places since then. He hasn't spoken publicly, but a lot of people are very interested in what he does have to say. And so Miscavige started having private investigators follow him, his own father. And the reason why it got and these guys see the Squirrel Busters is the other end of the spectrum, where Scientology will send out private investigators, and they want you to know you're being followed, because they talk to people you worked with or your family members. That's called a noisy investigation, and that's intended to have a psychological effect to drive you away. Then the other kind of thing they do are these ghost spies that go out, and their job is not to be discovered. So Ron Sr. was being followed by these two guys, and they were supposed to just completely blend in and not be discovered. But they got messed up because they were in this neighborhood they normally aren't in. Some people noticed them, thought they were suspicious, called the cops, and then they acted like idiots. And because of that, as you said, this arsenal was found, which I personally, my own belief is, there are a couple of gun nuts. They were not sent out there to assassinate Ron Sr. They just love guns, like some people do.
Okay.
And but what got them in trouble was they had made a PVC silencer for this assault rifle. And that's serious.
Right.
The father, it was a father-son team, and Dwayne Powell was the father. He was facing 10 years in prison for that little piece of PVC. And so they, facing that prospect, they sang like canaries.
Wow.
And they said, oh, yeah, we're working for the Church of Scientology. We're following this Ron Sr. We're getting paid $10,000 a week. We're supposed to find people to befriend him that will, spy on him. We're looking over his shoulder at the local restaurant to see if we can see what's on his email. All this stuff. It's amazing. And I have the tapes of those interviews up on my website, and I thought other people would post them, but I guess I'm the only one. But if you want to hear the full tapes, they're at my website. And but the best thing in this was that, again, keep in mind, they're getting paid $10,000 a week to follow Ron, and they can't be seen. They can't be noticed.
Right.
So Ron is at this Walmart, and he's out in the parking lot. 79-year-old guy, right? This actually happened a couple of years ago, but he was 77 then, and he's got a smartphone in his shirt pocket, and he goes to reach for it, and he didn't get a good grip on it, and he's starting to lose it. And so he grabs his chest. Now, these guys are spying on him from the other end of the parking lot, and they see the 77-year-old man clutching his chest, and they're thinking, oh, no, he's having a heart attack. Now, see, they can do one of two things. They can either call 911 or they can run over and help him. In either case, there's a chance their cover will be blown, and they'll lose their $10,000 a week.
Right.
So that's why they called their handler, not because they were so worried about Ron's health, but they were worried about the money. They called their handler, explained what was going on, and suddenly David Miscavige himself got on the phone and told them, if it's his time, let him die.
Wow.
And they told the police this, and it's on the record. So it's just incredible,
unbelievable
information. And here's the upshot. David Miscavige's greatest victory for Scientology was getting them tax-exempt status back in 1993.
Right.
I would like to see David Miscavige explain to the IRS how spending $10,000 a week for private investigators to follow his own father in case his own father said something negative about Scientology can be explained as an expense that has a religious purpose.
Wow.
You know, I mean, it's just there's no question that the IRS, if it cared to, could take away Scientology's tax-exempt status tomorrow.
Yeah.
Because of the way they spend money for things like that.
Is that something that you see as happening anytime soon? They will lose their tax-exempt status?
It's hard to predict because, IRS went through such battles and ultimately caved. And I don't know that they have there's a lot of inertia there. They would need a lot of pressure from the public, from Congress to get IRS to do that. And I don't know if it's there yet. And even with the movie Going Clear, I know Alex Gibney would like to see that happen.
Yeah.
But part of the problem is that Scientology is a tiny organization. It gets the press as if it really had the 10 million people that it claims.
Right.
But there's probably only 40,000 Scientologists around the world right now.
Wow.
It's always been a very small organization that gets more press than it deserves because it's got these celebrities, and it's odd and it's secretive. And people find it fascinating. So, is the government ready to move heaven and earth to take tax-exempt status away from this tiny little group? So I think there's a lot of inertia involved. I think Scientology's biggest problems are internal anyway. I think David Miscavige is driving this thing into the ground.
Wow.
And the IRS and the FBI may be just sitting back saying, let's just watch this thing implode on its own.
And just to follow up on that, do you know, to the best of your knowledge, is there any evidence or even circumstantial evidence that show that the Church of Scientology has any kind of leverage with the federal government? Do they have people in government that allow, for example, that maybe allow or help expedite the tax-exempt process or anything like that?
Oh, there's no question that they hire people who have influence in Washington, and one of their best tools for that was an attorney named Jerry Pfeffer. This was a guy in D.C. that had a lot of influence, and he helped them through a lot of these difficult fights. And he would go, when the FBI was investigating Scientology for human trafficking back in 2009, 2010, people like Jerry Pfeffer in D.C. were putting pressure on the Department of Justice to try to derail that. I don't think there's any specific politicians like Congress members, because Scientology is too weird, and politicians don't want to get involved with Scientology. There have been a few like Dan Burton who's gotten involved with them, but he's out now, and so if Scientology tries to have influence, every once in a while you'll see a story in the press. Scientology has a lobbyist; they pay all this money, and actually they for an organization that has as much money as they do, worth billions, they actually spend very little on lobbying in Washington. I know that I think they know it's kind of useless. But they hire individuals that have power, influence in D.C. And, when they had when we could see that most visibly was during the Clinton administration. Germany had cracked down on Scientology, and Travolta and Cruz both put pressure on the Clinton White House to do something about it. So I'm curious to see what happens if Hillary Clinton becomes president. Oh boy! If Scientology will find another, friendly White House or not.
Yeah, I did not know.
So if they can last that long, must be January 20th, 2017, right?
Yeah, it's coming up.
Quick question from the chat before we forget about it. It's from Jimbo Jimmy James, and I'll say Jimbo for now. Jimbo was asking, who do you think might be the third leader of Scientology?
If it gets that far, I suppose.
I doubt that there will be one, because I think Miscavige will be able to keep things going for a while because he has so much cash. But if Miscavige then runs into trouble, either through his own health or because of an investigation, I think Scientology is just going to be a massive litigation, and just it'll be just tied up in court cases forever. And I think there will always be people outside of the organization that practice Scientology, that have an interest in L. Ron Hubbard, but I find it difficult to believe that the organization, the legal entity, Church of Scientology International and RTC, will not just be completely tied up in the courts after Miscavige is done.
Wow. And Tony, I wanted to ask you in regards to, we're talking about how the Church of Scientology targets and harasses people. What has your experience been with the church in this regard? Yeah,
I usually try to dodge that question, but in the movie Going Clear, Alex Gibney asked me, and he's Alex Gibney, so I did mention that I have been targeted. And just one example was that they have their chief dirty tricks private investigator, this guy named Dave LeBeau, and he twice paid visits to my mother and really upset her, and that's the point. Is he's not going to get any information from her about me, but as soon as he leaves her porch, she then calls me and says, "Tony, that Church of Scientology guy was here, and she's upset. And makes me feel awful." And that's the point. The point is to make you psychologically terrorized that they're out talking to your family members or people you used to work with, and they talk to a lot, try and dig up dirt, just make me worried about it. And you just have to ignore it. I'm just a reporter covering a story. I was never a member of the Church of Scientology. Right. I just talk to people that were in it. I gather documents and I write stories. And I always do my best to get the church's version of things. Like in the book about Paulette Cooper, Scientology wrote its own sort of response to Paulette in 1974. So I studied that document very carefully. They wrote their own sort of version of what happened in the Snow White program in a book in the 70s, or 80s. And so I studied that very carefully. I want the church's side of things. But, when you do this kind of work, they're going to do their best to, rather than you can see it in that statement you read. Instead of saying, here's what we don't like about his book because it says this or whatever, they call me a parasite. I mean, that's the best they can do is call people names.
Yeah.
I've always wondered, do you think it requires a certain type of person, in terms of character and psychologically, to be susceptible to Scientology, or whether anyone could be drawn into it?
I think that's a good question, and something I think about, because on the one hand, it's only ever appealed to a small percentage of the public. Most people, hear, "Oh, we promise certainty, do this check sheet and your life will get better." And they think, "Hey, come on, life doesn't work that way." Yeah. And so most people just aren't even going to be tempted. But I find that the people who are tempted, they're very many different kinds of folks. It's not like one personality type. But what they tend to share is it's a moment in their life where they're going through some real difficulty. So Bruce Hines, for example, he was a physicist, a very scientific person. But at the time that he fell into Scientology, he'd just been through a bad breakup or something, and he was vulnerable. And I find that a lot when I talk to people. I'm like, what was going on in your life? And, they were a young person and felt like they didn't fit in, and they were looking for some direction in life, or they had been through a bad breakup, or they had a bad relationship with their parents. Scientology finds something that they can convince you they can fix. And so, virtually anybody could be susceptible to it. And I think that was the message that Alex Gibney really wanted people to get from Going Clear. When you have Paul Haggis and Jason Begay, Mike Rinder, Marty Rathbun, I mean, these were intelligent people. Hannah Whitfield, Spanky Taylor. These are really creative, successful, intelligent people, and they all fell into this thing for one reason or another. And they, like I said, they tend to have something that was difficult in their life at the time.
Wow. As I mentioned to you in one of my emails, we had a former Scientologist on the show, and she's a very lovely lady, and she began to tell me about the kids who are born into the church and grow up in the church, and that's all they know. To be honest, that terrified me a bit, because I can't imagine growing up in that environment. And then I kind of understood a little bit how hard it could be for someone to leave if that's all you've known. Have you spoken to anybody that was born in the church and, when they got older, they left?
Oh, yeah, lots of them. I
was just going to say, if you could tell us a little bit about the experience of that. Yeah.
Yeah, sure. I mean, some people dismiss Scientologists and say, "Oh, they were too stupid. They got into this stupid thing." And I think, how can you say that? Because a lot of them were born into it. I mean, their parents got them into it. Yeah. It's all they knew. And some of the second generation, third generation Scientologists go through some of the worst because, you know, Hubbard's idea is that we're these immortal souls that have lived countless times. So when you and I see a child, we see an underdeveloped small mammal that needs to learn a lot to understand life. Scientologists look at that little creature and think, that's an ancient being that's lived countless times before, and it's really an adult in a small package.
Wow.
And so they have very different ideas about child rearing. We hear about parents just basically abandoning their kids to these Scientology organizations because they think that, well, you know, they live past lives. And you may be the father or mother of this human now, but 15 or 16 lifetimes ago, you might have been their child. Or you might have been, you know, romantically involved. I mean, they have some really strange ideas about the family unit. That it's kind of an illusion. And remember, we're all just immortal Satan. And so you find stories about Scientology parents that they're, you know, they just basically sign their kids over to the organization. So I've talked to kids, people who, when they were kids, signed those SeaOrg billion-year contracts when they were 7 years old.
Wow.
Promising their entire life to Scientology.
Wow.
And it's incredibly, you know, it's bad enough to leave Scientology and then try to get out of that programming and get back into the modern world. But for some of these people, they never interacted with the modern world. They, you know, we find these people that when they come out of Scientology, they've never had a driver's license. They don't even know what insurance is. They've never had a legitimate job. And in fact, some of these, I know at least one wealthy former Scientologist that set up kind of a halfway house for these escaped SeaOrg members so they could come live at his house, and then he could show them, he could help them get their documentation and teach them about the modern world because they come out of this with so few skills.
Wow.
So, yeah, I think that, you know, all the things that Scientologists go through in general is always worse for the people that grew up in it.
Yeah, no, it sounds like it. It sounds like it must be a very traumatizing experience just getting out of it, and needless to say, being in it. Speaking of being born into the Church of Scientology, a lot was said about this practice of silent birth. You know, and we heard a lot about it when Tom Cruise and Katie Holmes were together and they had their baby girl. What can you tell me about this silent birth? Is that something exclusive to Scientology, or did they borrow it from somebody else?
I don't know why they're still doing it, because it really only comes from Dianetics, not Scientology. But his original idea, Hubbard's original idea in Dianetics, was that the most traumatic memories that you absorb that affect you later in life happen when you're an egg, sperm, or zygote. So you're this little fetus inside your mother, and mom and dad have rough sex and argue. This is straight out of the book Dianetics, I'm telling you. This is just such a strange and turgid book. And Hubbard was obsessed with the idea that every woman attempted abortion multiple times in her pregnancies. And all these fetuses went through all this trauma. So by the time you were born, you already had all these traumas, but you absorbed it through what people said around you. So his idea was, when the baby's being born, make sure everyone stays completely silent, because the baby is very vulnerable at that point, and anything somebody says could be absorbed as an engram in the infant, and 40 years later come up again in a way that's harmful. But the ways are so ridiculous. So, for example, an example from this book, if I remember correctly, was that somebody said the word aspirin, like a pill, right? Aspirin around a baby or a fetus in the womb, and the baby's brain absorbed that literally, but as the word aspirin, and as an adult develops a rash on his behind. This is the level of science in Dianetics.
Wow.
And so they don't want the baby to hear anything when it's being born, because somebody may say the word aspirin, and 40 years later, that person's going to have a rash.
Wow.
I mean, it's the most ludicrous thing in the world. But for Scientologists, it's kind of a loyalty test, you know? It's like, I did the silent birth. It was incredibly difficult, but I'm part of this group, and that's what we do. You know what I'm saying?
Oh my God.
No, I was just going to say it's ironic because they'll even go to the extents of making a pregnant woman, as we found out earlier today, go through what they call, I believe, the rehabilitation program.
It's almost like forced labor or some sort.
Well, yeah, but the point was, if they believe that, anything the mother and the baby experience prenatally affects that baby, then it's crazy to think that they'll still make the mother go through harsh, crazy, horrible conditions and forced labor during pregnancy.
Yeah, no, it is. And Tony, I'm pretty sure you're familiar with the Big Blue building here in Hollywood. What is the purpose of this building? I mean, I've heard that that's where they keep some people in solitary confinement in like the 7th floor or like the top floor there, but it also looks kind of nice. I mean, like what goes on there? I mean, they even named the little street in front of it L. Ron Hubbard, which is a testament, I guess, to how much money they got to do these things. But what is the purpose of that?
That was a hospital. It was known as Cedars of Lebanon, and Scientology purchased it in, I want to say, February 1977. They'd only been in there a few months when they were raided by the FBI later that year. I talked to somebody this weekend who claims he was the one who suggested that color blue when they were quizzing people there at the time.
Really?
And I don't have evidence to prove what he was saying, but it sounded like it. But anyway, he was there when that happened. So they painted the entire thing that very, the color blue that everybody knows. It's called Big Blue. Its official name is Pacific Area Command, or PAC base. And it has several different facilities within it. There's something called the AO, which is the Advanced Organization. That's where people go for their top level removing body statements from themselves. There's something called ASHO, which is the American St. Hill Organization. That's where you go clear with something called the Special Briefing Course. And then there's that V-shaped building at the south end that's the most famous. It's got the big Scientology sign on it. And, it's birthing. A lot of SeaOrg people live there, and a lot of people are punished there. And Spanky Taylor talked about being on the top floor with all these people that were in trouble. And the people who are in trouble in the SeaOrg go through something called the Rehabilitation Project Force, the RPF. And it's basically a prison program. And they have to run everywhere, and they wear these boiler suits, and they eat scraps. And going through the RPF used to take several months before you finally were allowed back in the regular population, and you could, you can't call home or that. In more recent years, it takes years to get off of the RPF. I talked to a guy that was in the RPF for 7 years.
Wow.
No.
He spent the millennium out at their RPF ranch. It was just another night like any other night. It's amazing that in the United States that an organization like Scientology can have this essentially prison program. That people get sent to for anything, like talking back, or there's no court or sentencing or anything like that. So so some of that, as far as are there RPF people at the Big Blue today, I think there are. I talked to some young women that were there recently, and had left, and it's still a place where people get training to get sent around the world and help run Scientology. But it was called Berendo Way, I think it was, something like that, and it got renamed L. Ron Hubbard Way by the city council.
Wow.
And it's a shell of what it once was. It's largely empty now, and all of Scientology is struggling, and they have these big buildings that are virtually empty.
Yeah, no, you drive around town, and it's funny, whether it's an affluent area or, some of the more not best kept areas of town, but you will find some huge, fancy looking building. And from what I've heard, it's that they're all empty. Here are all these, fancy buildings, yet they're empty. But it's a true, what I was told that, that they buy these up as places of worship because, I guess as a religious organization with a tax-exempt status, you have to invest into houses of worship for your church members. But nobody is really found there doing any kind of worship.
It's becoming a dwindling organization, and it's harder for them to keep people in, and they keep buying buildings, but they keep buying buildings to pretend that it's expanding because they have the cash, but they just can't fill it with people.
Wow. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but it's been an amazing time talking to you. Why don't you tell people where they can find you and where they can get your book, which sounds like a great read.
Thank you. I write about Scientology at my own website. It's TonyOrtega.org, also known as the Underground Bunker. We cover Scientology there every day, and I've got an amazing community of folks who know so much about it and really talk to each other. It's a great internet forum, unlike most others. And the book is called The Unbreakable Miss Lovely. It's available at Amazon. And I've got a lot of extra material for it at the website. So, for example, I couldn't include any photographs in the book, but I've got a lot of photographs of Paulette and her life on the website that go with it.
Awesome. And you're going to be in London, you said, right?
I'm going to be in D.C. on July 12th. I'm going to be at the Mark Twain House.
Nice.
In Hartford on July 14th. Then I'm going to go west. I'll be in Denver and Texas, and then I'm going over to Paris and London.
Very cool.
And then after that, I'm going to be in the Northwest. I'm going to do Minneapolis and then Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver in September.
Wow.
That sounds like an awesome trip.
Yeah, no, you definitely have a busy schedule. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. I know your plane had just landed and you pretty much got on the phone with us. And believe me, we really appreciate it that you were so generous with your time.
Hey, your questions were great. I really enjoyed it.
I'm glad. And don't forget to follow Tony Ortega on Twitter, right? At Tony Ortega 94 is the Twitter handle. So definitely give him a follow. Tony, thank you so much. We will let you get some rest now. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Okay, guys. Thank you so much. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Take care. Have a great night.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Wow. That was...
a lot of information.
That was yeah. And honestly, it's amazing. The more you find out about the Church of Scientology, the scarier it gets. And, we got to give Tony Ortega huge props for doing what he does. And, Lynn, who was on our show, as the former Scientologist that we interviewed, she said that one of the things that she found is that you can't be afraid of them. And I think Tony is definitely the embodiment of somebody that doesn't sound afraid at all of the church and is willing to put out there, what is really going on in that organization.
Yeah, no, I mean, just, I'd be the sort of person who'd be pretty darn scared. Honestly, I'm not exactly sure what I would do. I can't mentally fully put myself into that situation, and I don't know whether I would have the guts to do what he does.
Yeah.
And do what, people like Paulette Cooper did.
Yeah, yeah.
But there was a question which unfortunately came just a second too late in the chat by Professor Madness, and he was asking if Tony Ortega moderates a site, and if it even just answers the question a little, he does have a blog webmaster, and he's called Scott Pilutic.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but I'm sure if at all, it would be Scott who moderates the website.
Yeah, and definitely grab his book, The Unbreakable Miss Lovely. It sounds like a great read. Here at West of the Rockies, we're gonna grab a copy and definitely check it out because it sounds like an amazing story. And the way Tony wrote it, it sounds like it should be a really interesting read. That's for sure.
Well, yeah, almost like an exciting adventure written in real time.
Yeah. So once again, don't forget, check out his website. Follow him on Twitter. We're going to be posting all this info on our website, as well as the audio for this interview in case you missed any part of it. It'll be on our website. And also, our podcasts are available on iTunes. So if you go to iTunes and type in West of the Rockies, you'll see us on there. Click subscribe. Check out some of the past shows. We've had some excellent guests. And we'll definitely be uploading this one in the next couple of days for everyone's enjoyment because, it was an amazing show. It was a great show. Once again, huge thanks to Tony Ortega for being our guest tonight.
Definitely.
And with that, we're going to bid adieu to everybody. I hope I said that
I
right.
don't think you ever said that. I
Never
don't even
said
know
that.
what that means.
Yeah. Anyways, I don't know. I guess I'm just trying to process all the information.
Your brain's somewhere else right now.
But we're gonna go out with a track that I heard this week, and it's pretty cool. I thought it was an old song. It turns out that it's actually a new song from an album that hasn't even been released yet.
Old.
Yeah, it's pretend old. But it's a band that goes by the name of The Arcs, and apparently it's the singer from I forgot the name of that other band.
Black Keys.
The Black Keys, there you go. And I guess it's the first single off their forthcoming debut album, which is really cool. Enjoy, take care, be safe, God bless. Don't do anything too crazy. We want to see you back next week. We're going to have another exciting show.
If you are going to do something crazy, film it and post it online.
Yep. And again, don't forget to check out the website, WoTRradio.com. As always, Engineer Frank on Twitter, West of the Rockies on Facebook, Genevieve Uwe on Twitter. Thank you guys. Have a great night. Enjoy this one. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
West of the Rockies with Frank the Engineer on the Independent FM, Los Angeles.